All right, Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, thank you so much for joining me today.
Evan, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So, Medicare for All has been an important policy, not just to your campaign, but your professional career and political career. Tell me a little bit more about your experience as a physician, a public health professional, and an educator, and how that shaped your advocacy for a universal healthcare program.
Well, Evan, I really appreciate you. And I became a doctor because I could go 15 hours to my family's native Egypt or 15 minutes into the city of Detroit. And either way, I'd cross a 10-year life expectancy gap. And in med school, I came to realize that at the end of the day, doctors ask two questions: what's wrong? How can I help? And too often, the answer to what's wrong has a lot less to do with the physiology you study and a lot more to do with the circumstances in our society: air people breathe, the water they drink, whether or not they can walk in their community without being a victim of somebody's violence, whether it's a neighbor or the state itself, whether or not they can even see a doctor. And I had a patient experience at the end of med school that made me realize that we were spending all this time trying to take care of the richest patients who went to the ninth floor on the hospital where there was a pianist, and the hospital was trying to chew up and spit out all the other folks who could not pay the same amount. And it made me realize that our system is not just not part of the solution, it's part of the problem. And so when we all graduated medical school and all my classmates went off to be specialists in medicine, I realized I wanted to go into public health and I wanted to be able to fix the system from the outside. Watch the debate on our healthcare system, and it's so clear that it's dominated by big corporations, whether it's pharma, who's the single biggest lobbyist in all of American politics, or it's the insurance industry, or it's the hospital industry. And realize that if we were willing to address our politics, by which we allow corporations to corrupt our system, buy and sell politicians to do their bidding instead of ours, we could actually have a great healthcare system that benefits everybody. That's what Medicare for All is. It's guaranteed healthcare from the moment you are born to the moment you expire, hopefully after 120 years peacefully in your sleep, right? But it's there for you. No copays, no deductibles, no premiums, no network, in network, out of network, just healthcare when you need it without having to worry about whether or not it's going to send you into bankruptcy. And I've seen the impact it would have as the former health commissioner for the city of Detroit on communities that have been locked out of our healthcare system for too long. And I also know that it would solve problems for so many of us who sit precariously in this space where we're like, well, I could go see a doctor, but maybe I'd have to pay out of pocket and I don't know if I can afford it. So and then we watch and we wait and we sit with the anxiety of not getting the health care we need and deserve. We don't have to live like this. Medicare for All would be the answer that would free us of that.
Definitely. I became interested in politics around 2016, and I remember in the Democratic primary then, as well as throughout the 2020 primary, it felt like healthcare was at the top of the priority list in terms of just policy discussions within the Democratic primary. And it felt like we were at the very least on the precipice as a nation to get something even more robust than the ACA, maybe not Medicare for All quite yet. But now it just seems like we're fighting to return to the status quo. We're trying to ensure that we have Medicaid funding that just got gutted with the Trump administration, or ACA subsidies. How do we as a nation get back to a place where Medicare for All and universal coverage doesn't feel like this pipe dream far out as many Americans conceive of it, but something real and tangible that that we can actually implement?
Well, we have to go decide we're going to fight for it. I mean, here's the frustrating thing about the way Democrats do politics is that we run these polls and then we find the things that everybody thinks in the middle of the poll, and then we go say those things. But it turns out that instead of actually fighting for the things that we believe to be morally right, that people need and deserve, we're just saying things that are getting dragged in one direction by Republicans. I mean, when Donald Trump came down that hideous golden escalator back in 2015, immigration was an issue people were talking about. Now he's using immigration to destroy the Constitution itself via ICE. Imagine what would happen if we picked the righteous fight and kept talking about why you need and deserve healthcare, why it should be guaranteed to you, why the corporations are the ones standing in your way. Imagine where we might be. But we've given up on persuasion, and a lot of that is because too many Democrats take money from the corporations who are on the wrong side of the system in the first place. So as the only candidate in my race who's never touched a dime of corporate money, I'm well placed to be able to say, hey, look, we can have nice things. We just can't have nice things brought to us by corporations whose CEOs have way too many nice things, right? We've got to decide. And I'm not bought off by that system. So I'm out here talking to folks about what we need and deserve. And guess what? It's working. People recognize they're getting a bum deal. And so I just think that we've lost the conversation because we've stopped having the conversation because it was too comfortable for too many folks funded by the current system not to have it. And then we wonder why we're losing. Well, they haven't stopped persuading. And so maybe it's time for us to go and fight for the things we need. Look, I get if I'm elected, I'm going to be one U.S. senator. I get it. But I'll be one U.S. senator with the microphone that a U.S. senator gets. And my conversation isn't just with 99 other senators. It's with the 350 million people who elected all of us. That's the conversation we need to keep having. And that's a conversation I'm looking forward to having about why we really can guarantee healthcare if we're willing to stand up to this system that has corrupted us from thinking that we can.
The state, Michigan, that you're looking to represent in the U.S. Senate, especially cities like Detroit, have experienced the brunt of deindustrialization in the American economy. Your website points to deals like NAFTA as being disastrous for American manufacturing. What does industrial policy look like to you, and what industries do you think the United States needs to prioritize in investing in?
Yeah. Look, my dad immigrated to this country to build cars. That's what he wanted to do. He's an automotive engineer. And back in 1978, he knew that the best single place to do that was the United States of America. I believe it still is, but I believe that our politicians don't believe that. And so they've traded away our ability to build stuff in this country. NAFTA was a disaster, and there are policy solutions to try and continue to build stuff and build more stuff here in this country. I think when you think about the stuff that we build, yes, it's going to be cars. Yes, it's going to be the future of cars, but it's also going to be things like renewable energy. So how do you do it? Well, you invest research and development dollars to support industry that is going to grow in these spaces. And then, yes, you have a system of tariffs that are smart, they are thoughtful, they are well articulated, they have an endpoint around protecting those industries as they grow and they start to build on the global stage, and then pulling those tariffs down over time once your industry is thriving on the international market. The way that Donald Trump has done tariffs has been ham-handed. It has been chaotic. It has been self-serving, like everything Donald Trump does. But if NAFTA is cancer, then I do think you need some chemo. But what Donald Trump has done is given the patient all the chemo at the same time, which of course is a great way to kill your patient. So instead, I think this thoughtful approach that is targeted around very specific industries, that is well communicated to everybody involved, including our trading partners, that has very clear benchmarks, that can be a way to go to continue to invest in industry and building stuff here in America in the future. And I'll just tell you, we've got the best workers. We've got the best engineers. We've got the best talent. What we don't have is a financial system that rewards being really good at what you do, and instead it incentivizes things like stock buybacks. And then when corporate CEOs can buy and sell politicians to make sure that they can keep making money, we get this problem here. So I'm saying you got to address those financial incentives. You've got to ban things like stock buybacks. You've got to make sure that CEOs are being rewarded for how effective their companies are in 10 years and because of how much they've innovated and how well they've built, rather than in a quarterly system where they can play these financial games that are really only about them and shareholders, rather than about the quality of the product and, more importantly, the workers.
On a related note, on the topic of jobs, when you look at the direct relationship with the rates of unionization in this country, how it's fallen, and then the share of new income going to the top 10, 5, 1% in this country, there's a direct relationship. What do we need to do as a nation to get back to having not just robust manufacturing jobs, but well-paying unionized jobs?
So I'm a second generation union member. I know what unions can mean for folks. And unions are the reason we have a 40-hour work week. They're the reason our kids go to school instead of going to work. They're the reason we have a thing called a weekend. Unions built this country. They built the middle class, and they can do it again. The problem, though, is that we've empowered corporations to bust unions at every turn. And we've made it nigh on impossible to build unions in growing sectors, especially in service sectors. So I think we've got to pass the PRO Act to be able to enable union formation and building on equal footing with management, so that folks can start to bargain together, so that we can start to re-engage the benefits of collective bargaining. And you think about union sisters and brothers in the nursing industry, in the healthcare industry, in of course manufacturing, and these folks have had a hard go of it for the past several decades because of our public policy. And I think we got to We've got to flip the script. We've got to make it easier to build and join or form a union. We've got to make it easier to be a member of a union. We've got to stop the union free riding that's happened, where unions are not being able to collect dues and start to build the power that benefits the union because of public policy like right to work. And we've got to trust unions to be able to do what they've done throughout our history, which is help to even out the benefits of industry. And, I'd love to see a world where you've got software engineers, right? You've got doctors starting to unionize and recognize that they got to hold big tech and hospitals accountable. Imagine what that would mean for how those industries behaved. So it's not just the impact for workers themselves, but it's also the impact on the behavior of these industries that have become, pretty pernicious in American life.
Totally. My generation has been notably vocal over our concern over Palestine. One frustration I know many in my generation have is that the Democratic Party espouses support for things like a two-state solution, condemnation over Netanyahu, but there's never a commitment to a sustained material policy change that actually aims at upholding Palestinian human rights. And if anything, we see either a continuation of the status quo or just increased military aid and support to the object of the United States' earlier ire and frustration. So what relationship would you like would you like to see the United States take with Israel? And as a senator, what role do you have in actualizing that change?
We just paid our taxes in April. And you pay your taxes so that your family and your kids get to get good schools, and you get to have health care, and your public services work, and your roads aren't riddled with potholes. But our government sees it fit to send billions of dollars of that money to buy bombs and tanks for foreign militaries. I think that should just end. And that should end for Israel. That should end for Egypt, where my family comes from, second biggest recipient of foreign military aid in the world. For Saudi Arabia, for Jordan. I just don't pay my taxes so those countries get bombs and tanks. I pay those taxes so that our families get the things that they need and deserve right here in Michigan. I'm running for Senate in Michigan, not Senate anywhere else. And so my primary concern, unlike many other senators, it seems, is to make sure that my money gets spent here in Michigan as the senator from Michigan, because I'm from Michigan. So that should go without saying. That's not difficult to say, but it seems almost impossible for too many folks in elected office to say, in large part because of the power of one very large special interest that's going to spend, $20 million they're saying, to beat me in this race alone, because I have the willingness to say that, and also because I know the definitions of words, and when things are genocides, you call them genocides, and when things are apartheid, you call them apartheid. So, I think our relationship ought to be the same relationship with every other country. At the end of the day, we are going to engage you based on whether or not you are consistent with our values. And right now, Israel is acting deeply inconsistently with our values. They talk about being the only democracy in the Middle East, but I'm so sorry, what kind of democracy also undergoes genocide? Or what kind of democracy also consists in apartheid? Those are not things that are consistent with democratic values. They're just not. And I think we've just got to be honest about that, and we've got to engage accordingly. So no more military aid, right? Because at the end of the day, we just shouldn't do that anywhere unless it's specifically around the condition of upholding international law like we're doing in Ukraine. No more selling you weapons because you're violating the Leahy laws, which are laws that are on the books. And also, there's this crazy thing where we think as policymakers in America that it's our job to figure out what the final peace looks like. It's not. It's not my job. My job is to make sure people in Michigan got food, they got shelter, they got good schools, and our roads aren't shit. That's my job in Michigan, right? That's the job. And my job is not to tell other people how to make peace. That's not my job. So everyone's like, one state, two state. I'm like, I don't know. I want equal rights to peace, dignity, and self-determination for Jewish Israelis and Palestinians. And it is on them, on equal footing, to decide what that looks like. Not me, not my job, right? And it's the hubris that I think we've often had to think that it is actually our job that has been part of the problem. I'm just trying to say, don't use my tax dollars that should be spent here to make their worse. Shouldn't be that hard. It's interesting to me because people are like, well, you must hate. No, I don't hate anybody. I love Judaism and the Jewish people. And I also love Palestine and the Palestinian people, right? I love people. That's what I love. I love the idea, right, that people ought to be able to be who they are and live in peace, dignity, and have their own right to self-determination. And it is out of that love, right, that I come to this position. But it's not our jobs to decide how folks decide the final peace there, right? these folks deserve equal rights to their peace, dignity, and self-determination. It is their job to figure it out, our job to make sure our money's not making it worse and is making problems better for folks here at home.
Senator John Fetterman a couple weeks ago said that now you're leading in the race as more the Democratic Party becomes hostile to Israel. He later said, try winning in Pennsylvania by campaigning with Hassan Piker, to which you responded on Twitter, thanks for the endorsement, John Fetterman. Can't wait to work with Senator Summer Lee when we get to the Senate. And I have to say, the most recent Michigan Senate race poll has you in an even lead, while Fetterman has seen a 108-point drop in his net approval among PA Dems since his election in 2023. What do you think that says about the state of politics today and where the base of the Democratic Party is currently at?
People are sick and tired of watching their politicians shill for other folk. They're just tired of it, right? And, John Fetterman, I don't know, has decided to be an ogre ever since he got elected. And I think he's feeling the brunt of it. And I'm really looking forward to watching as he loses his seat in the U.S. Senate to somebody who is willing to actually do work that is about basic peace, dignity, and human rights for people in Pennsylvania, right? Like, that's the thing about it is, like, at the end of the day, like, it's funny because people think that it's about centering there. It's like really just not. It is about centering people here. Like, when you look up and you realize that, like, you're breathing smog, you can't see a doctor, you barely can keep the lights on in your own house, and these folks are like shilling for a foreign government. What the fuck? Like, how does this make sense? So, at the end of the day, like, voters gonna vote, and you better be ready to explain why it is that you are out here trying to make every issue about shilling for a foreign government when your own government can't figure out how to do the basic shit right. I'm just, I don't know, man. I've studied complicated shit. This is not that complicated.
Right. Last question. You, unlike your competitors, have advocated for the complete abolition of ICE rather than just an overhaul of reform. Why is ICE abolition important rather than simply reform?
I mean, maybe it's because I've run government agencies and neither of the other folks running for this seat have. But, like, when there's a culture that sets in where you think you are not accountable to the broader public, you think you can shoot people in the face, and the right response is one of ours, all of yours. When you recruit people who don't meet the basic requirements for the job, you don't even train them, and then you give them weapons of war to enforce what is actually civil law, by the way, right? Like, this is not criminal law. Immigration policy is not criminal law, it's civil law. It's like you get a parking ticket. Imagine ICE ran up on you after you get a parking ticket, but you better pay your parking ticket. Like, it's insane. It doesn't make sense. But beyond that, $185 billion. That is more than the budget of the FBI. That is more than the budget of the U.S. Marines. And we're spending that money to shoot people in the face. Like, that's so, I don't know. It seems to me like the middle position is like, this shouldn't exist. And by the way, I am older than ICE. Chances are you're probably also older than ICE, right? Like, ICE is not written into the U.S. Constitution. Like, this is not a thing that, like, must exist, right? It doesn't exist in the articles of the Constitution. We have done this in the past well without the existence of this agency. So my point is, you can have a safe and secure southern border, and we need to make sure our southern border is secure. We can have immigration enforcement. We should, but not like this, right? And here's the last point I want us to make. Why is ICE this way? Well, it's because Donald Trump has been waging at this point, 11-year-long war against the U.S. Constitution itself. He recognized that ICE and the pretext of immigration was the best way for him to create a paramilitary force of thugs who he could put on your street corner to be accountable only to him. And that is what he's doing. So this is not about immigration. This is not about the southern border. I went to Minneapolis to check it out for myself. And guess what? I know maps. I went to public schools in America, right? Minneapolis is not on the southern border. Wrong border. So this is not about immigration. This is about whether or not we want to live under a constitution and we believe in the rule of law. So I would like to abolish the agency that has existed in large part to end or at least push back against the rule of law and the Constitution. Like, that should be an obvious thing everybody should say.
Amazing. Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, thank you so much for joining.
Evan, thanks for having me. It's been a privilege. And look, if folks want to be involved, I hope that they'll check us out, abdulforsenate.com. check us out, volunteer for us if you can. We are building a community of folks coming together to change our politics, get money out of politics, put money in your pocket, pass Medicare for all. And if you want to chip us off $5, $10, that goes a long way. So I hope folks will get involved. And Evan, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.